is Congressman Joe Sestak, who joins us now on the Young Turks. Congressman, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, Congressman, I want to talk to you a little bit about the stress test, but before we get to that, obviously the big news that everybody wants to know about is whether you're going to run against Arlen Specter in the Democratic primary.
Well, this decision by the establishment down here in Washington, D.C., actually anointing Arlen, who I have respect for, by the way, actually moved me more towards getting into the race. But I have said that I'm going to wait. I have great respect for those Democrats down here in Washington. They made the decision. I want to see what Arlen's running for. And I have to tell you, though, when I saw that he voted against President Obama's budget, the budget's going to retool our health care, we retooled our education system. Well, it hasn't made me any more way and took me another inch towards that. But I'm going to give it some weeks and a few months, but no more. And I got to tell you, this is about Pennsylvanians. It's not about Washington, D.C. telling us what we need. And that's why it moved me more towards it.
Congressman, since he has made the switch over to being a Democrat, has Senator Specter voted with the Democrats on any issue so far?
Haven't seen it. Haven't seen it.
Because so far he seems to have not only voted with the Republicans on a number of issues, but seems to indicate that he's going to continue to vote with them on Employee Free Choice Act, health care, etc. What does that leave us? I think it leaves us some important things, like the Supreme Court nominee, which we assume he's going to be on our side, but is that good enough?
No, I mean, if he has said, which he has, that I don't intend to change my vote, then why didn't he stay in the GOP? Why did he leave, and I believe this, good Republicans behind, moderate Republicans? I mean, why is he switching? There's too many Pennsylvanians who have lost their jobs to be worried about political survivability here. And the key here is, and you've said it well, can we rely upon him in 2010, 12, 14, 15, 16? This is a long period of time for us Pennsylvanians to say, wow, he's our guy. We cannot have buyer's remorse on this one. It's too important on the issues as we go forward. And that's what it's got to be decided upon. Can we rely upon him? Jury's really out on this one.
And Congressman, how do you make the decision? What are you going to look at as to
great question.
As to how to decide?
Look, you know me. After 31 years in the Navy, I always feel you got to walk around the deck plates and talk to the sailors, so to speak. So yesterday, 4 o'clock, we had our last vote of the day. I jumped in a car, drove 5 hours up to Pittsburgh. There was a Jefferson Jackson dinner for the Allegheny County Democrats there. I stayed there a couple hours. I got there halfway through dinner and just didn't tell anybody it was coming. Just kind of walked around and asked them what they thought. It was concerned. Then I got in the car 5 hours, got back here at 4:30 a.m. I wanted to know just what people thought. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to be doing my own independent thinking. Look, we Pennsylvanians are really independent. And I think that what happened kind of just reminds everybody, look, we're a nation of independent-minded people. There's no kings, and there's no king makers. So this is something where I'm not taking a poll. I'm out there just kind of trying to assess what people are saying. And I have to tell you, it is not about seniority or having, as Arlen said, when pressed, what's in it for you? He said, what he didn't say was, what's in it for Pennsylvanians? And second, when pressed, he said, I didn't get anything, but then again, pressed again, he said, well, okay, I got seniority, and that was an entitlement. We don't have entitlements. So you begin to say something, and I mean this, is, for me, what's moved me more towards it is the ideal for which a number of us over the last 3 years got into politics for. Changing the establishment, the way Washington, D.C. does business, not reestablishing it. You kind of feel it. And I have to tell you, though, there's a little bit more of a fire in the belly, actually a lot more, because of how this happened.
I want to get to that in 1 second. When we're talking to Congressman Joe Sestak, he's not only a congressman from Pennsylvania, of course, but he's also a retired United States Navy Rear Admiral. In fact, he's the highest-ranking former military officer to serve in Congress. So, Congressman, is there anything that Arlen Specter can do where you would say, all right, then that's good enough, and I definitely won't get in the race? Or is there anything he can do where you say, oh, well, that breaks the camel's back, I'm definitely going into the race?
There's 5 key issues for me that I want to hear him outline and actually speak about. And then, of course, after he does, and I'll list those very quickly, but I want us all, figuratively, to look him in the eye and say to ourselves, do we like the cut of his jib? I mean, do we feel comfortable that we can rely upon what he said? Because he left a fight and crossed the line over here. Will he cross back on those 5 key issues, which is, number one, our economic security? How does he feel about these stress tests, the Federal Reserve unwinding what we've been in? And other issues having to do with jobs. Number 2, health security. Heavens forbid we need affordable, accessible, quality care. It's costing our economy $100 billion a year because we don't have 47 million Americans covered. Third, education security. Pennsylvania, tied up there with Florida, is the oldest average age of Americans of any state in the Union. How do we get the right educational opportunity for everyone so that you stay in Pennsylvania? Fourth, energy and environmental security. 3 out of 4 times he's voted wrong on the environmental issues for where Democrats believe he should vote. And then energy, 67% reliance on foreign oil. It's a national security issue. And finally, defense security. He voted for Iraq war, having derailed the health plan also in the 90s that we were trying to have cover everyone. We've got Pakistan, Iran. How do you approach this in a way that recognizes militaries don't fix problems? They may stop them for a moment, but other elements of our power eventually fix problems. When he lays those out clearly, and then if we feel we can rely upon him, which is a big question, then we Democrat primary voters can say, yes, he's our man. But if he isn't, there should be another man or woman getting into this race, because it's too important to us Pennsylvanians to have a Washington, D.C. tell us this is the guy. Those deals were now washed yesterday. They're fighting over the spoils of who gets seniority. That doesn't affect us up in Pennsylvania. What affects us is health care and economic opportunity, and I feel pretty strongly about that.
Congressman Sestak, if we're going to use your test here for whether you're going to jump it in the race or not, he's failing on at least 4 out of the 5 categories by your estimation. Education maybe is more of a toss-up. That seems like you're going in. I mean, any reasonable person listening has got to be thinking that your decision is, at this point, pretty much made, given those considerations.
Well, the most fortunate thing we have going for us this year right now is a president that has the right type of approach to anything. And because I respect him, and I'm getting better understanding maybe of why he made this decision, I do feel, as I said, I should give time to at least assess this issue because of him. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the time, I know that this wonderful president said, look, Arlen, we don't mind a difference of opinion at times. So he will not mind a difference of opinion in a Democrat. Because I'll tell you, that budget of his, when I was over in the White House 5 or 6 weeks ago in a group meeting with him, and he said it, and I believe it, that this is the year to retool our economy in terms of health reform and education and energy. And then to have an individual vote against it who has crossed the lines doesn't set it up well for saying, no, we don't need someone else, because we're close to a decision here.
Finally, on this issue, Congressman, you have said now at least 3 times that you were annoyed by the way it was handled in Washington and that it created more of a fire in your belly over it. Who were you annoyed by and why?
Let me just say, it's not annoyed. I think the better word, if you don't mind, is disappointed. Look, we all came from the president to me to come down here and change the establishment. And then you had senators and individuals in the White House that decided that this is our guy, and we're all lining up behind him. No, Pennsylvanians decide that. So I respect their opinion, but I was kind of disappointed that all of a sudden, almost overnight, that the one establishment, it appeared, said to another establishment, I know he hasn't worked out in the GOP establishment, come on over, join us, and we'll tell the Democrats up there in Pennsylvania that we've anointed someone. However, I have great respect for those individuals that made that decision in our party.
So,
But it doesn't mean after the assessment we need to agree with them in Pennsylvania. This is a decision of us primary Democratic voters.
Congressman, the man that the press says is primarily responsible for bringing Specter over is Joe Biden, the vice president,
Yes.
who had called him on many occasions and perhaps made, at least implicit promises that the field would be cleared. Is that who you're referring to?
Well, yeah, I think, well, obviously, the president, the vice president, Senator Reid, they all agreed that this was the right thing to do. And I guess I understand why, from a Washington perspective, they feel as though they might have wanted him over there. And I have respect for them. But, Joe Biden, what a man of the people, the vice president. However, I joined up in the military back in 1970, Vietnam War, with a sense of obligation. I came into politics 3 years ago after getting out with that same sense. And my obligation is to Pennsylvanians, my district first, who's being affected by this. And so, with due respect, and I mean due respect to those individuals, the principles I joined the military are the same ones here. You have to also stand up for those that you are serving. And I'm not sure they're being best served by this decision in Washington, D.C. It's something happened here that I'm uncomfortable with. And from being up in Allegheny County last night, and thinking about it on the way up, and thinking about what was said on the way back, those 10 hours of driving, I think there's others who are a bit uncomfortable with it. And if there's anything that the last few elections have been about, it's about removing the cloud of cynicism over Washington, D.C. And this seemed like another shovelful, inadvertently, I'm sure. But I have to tell you, that ideal of serving the public, not telling the public what to do, is something that I believe is the greatest danger, if we don't fix it, to our country even more than economic security.
All right, you're going in. That's how I'm hearing this. But I understood your answer. That's my interpretation. But I got to ask you about the stress test.
Absolutely.
They come down today and they say $75 billion more 10 of these banks need, but they're solvent and they're viable. Frankly, I don't understand that. How could they be viable and solvent if they need an extra $75 billion?
Well, it's interesting. What they did is actually gave a higher level of equity criteria than has been done in the past. Because in the past, what we've been doing is giving preferred stock. Government has been buying preferred stock, which cannot be converted into common stock. And so therefore, those who do the ratings say, boy, that preferred stock isn't as good as if you gave them common stock. So what we're doing now is giving them convertible preferred stock, which means it could go into common. We actually set a higher criteria in these stress tests. And by the way, these stress tests, which I think is so good, Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually did a stress test when he did a banking holiday. He actually did, it was a simpler form of it, when he did close all the banks, he actually had about 10 of the banks never opened up because of the stress test that he did. In this case, government usually reacts instead of shooting ahead of the rabbit. And you could see that from post-Katrina. You could see that from post-Iraq. We didn't plan well, and now we're reacting to Afghanistan because of the tragic misadventure in Iraq rather than having done the job that we should have done there. So my thing is, if we looked ahead and said, supposing the economy gets worse than the common predictions, we made GDP go down more, unemployment would be higher than the present predictions, and then we said, in case it gets that bad, we even want a higher criteria of reserves kept by the bank, and that's what that $75 billion was. I have to say, I think the president, I think the Treasury Secretary, and Mr. Bernanke on this one did well because they did it in sense of preparing. Heaven forbid if we'd only prepared and had a referee on the football field over the 90s and last decade of the $67 trillion in derivatives we have had, we wouldn't be in this today. If someone had listened to Ms. Brodsky, head of the Commodity Future Trade Commission in 1998, we wouldn't be where we are today. And we're finally beginning to shoot ahead of the rabbit in government on this issue.
But Congressman Sestak, what kind of a stress test is it if the banks can't fail? The Treasury Department and the Fed said that they are not allowed to fail. So it leaves me unconvinced that we're really on top of the problem. And it concerns me that they're saying that these banks are solvent when they're not, which could lead to a bigger problem down the road.
It's a great point that you have. But I was supportive when they said they couldn't fail, because right now, unfortunately, this president inherited years of mismanagement by others. And what occurred here is, if he lets one of these banks fail, in the fragile sense that we have, where the economy is no longer intensifying. It's intense, but not intensifying, where credit has begun to come back. Look, the day I voted for that bailout bill, they called it, back in September, LIBOR, the overnight lending rate of banks to each other, shot up to about 6.5%, where usually it's below 0.2%. No bank was lending to another, and the Federal Reserve printed about $680 billion that night, so the banks could legally open the next morning. Today, LIBOR's down very, very low. Credit's beginning to flow again. He did the right thing by saying, I ain't telling the public, I'm going to stress the banks in a very more harsh situation than is probable in the future. But I'm going to tell you all, so that you don't run from the banks that need a little bit more money, we're so doing well enough now as compared to 6 months ago that I'm going to back up these banks. He's actually beginning to have the mother milk of our economy, credit, begin flowing again. We may not like having to do this, but it's the lesser of two evils. No, I have to agree with this president very much on this. If anything, the bold, aggressive action he has taken is salvaging. To look at the unemployment rate, 600,000 today, big number. But the modeling, and my advanced degree is political economy, so I run the models, shows that if we get to 500,000 by July, we're coming out of this. And I'm glad that he approached it the way he did. It's a pragmatic approach. I understand why people on both sides might argue on it, but I think this president has given us nice, firm leadership on this one with the confidence that, yep, we're preparing for an even worse future if it were to happen.
All right, Congressman Sestak, on that one we have to agree to disagree, because I think we would have been better off taking bolder action and pushing them into receivership. But unfortunately, we're out of time here, and we really appreciate your opinion and your take on it, and you joining us today on the Young Turks.
Look, thanks for having me very much.
All right, Congressman Sestak from Pennsylvania. We'll be right back on the Young Turks.